Hello, everyone. This is Sherry. Welcome back to the KC7 channel. Tonight, I have Simeon with me and a very special guest. This is Mr. Bryan Quillen, and I'm going to have him introduce himself, and then we'll go from there.
Hi, my name is Bryan Quillen. I am a teacher in Jefferson County, Louisville. I've been teaching for 12 years, and I currently teach cybersecurity. And for the last 11 years, I taught English, not cybersecurity at all. So it's been a fun year.
So we have been, last week we talked about the KC7 camp. So I am so excited to actually bring an educator who is using this game in his classroom. And I'm just curious to know more about this. So Bryan, do you mind to share how you went from teaching English to cybersecurity? That's kind of an interesting story all in itself before we get into the game.
Yeah, so I went into English because I love reading. I love stories. Writing just came naturally to me. So it was a natural fit. I was always into gamification. So I worked with OVEC and the Board of Education to be in different innovative teacher cohorts. And that typically led to me using a lot of technology in my class. And so I was always on the forefront of technology in my school, and I ended up being the tech guy that everyone came to. If you had a question, it was me. And I got so into the tech part that I thought to myself, why not just get paid for this? So I went and got another degree in educational technology. And as soon as I had that degree, my principal said, hey, you would be great for this class. So I had about 6 months of mental prep before I completely abandoned all that I knew and jumped into this class. And at first, I was not not sure that it was going to continue and be like something great, but now I would not change anything at all. If anything, I would have done it sooner.
So when did you start teaching cybersecurity?
This year,
This
August.
year. Okay. So it's my understanding you didn't start with KC7. You started with another curriculum, right?
See, that's fun. No, we didn't have a curriculum. Uh, I was introduced to the CompTIA ITF Plus test, and so in order to prepare my students to pass that, because we need post-secondary readiness in the
Hmm.
CTE programs, I would introduce some of that content weekly, and it's so much and so dry that I tended to lean towards project-based learning in other ways. So I introduced any Adobe Creative Cloud app or Blender. We did code through various websites. So it was always projects alongside a potential information technology fundamental curriculum. Um, but then when I was introduced to this game, it has just kind of taken over symbiote suit style.
How were you introduced to the game?
So, one of my connections from OVEC actually introduced me to Greg because about a week before that, I reached out looking for business partners because that's something very new to me that I need for this program. And the goal of a business partner is to give me the kind of information I need to make sure that my course is constantly relevant to the real world outside of school. And IT help desk is pretty much where I was pushing kids because that's where my knowledge base is at the moment. Um, but when I first talked to Greg, I opened up this link to KC7 and was mind blown at what I didn't know. And then we sat down and met, and Greg walked me through it, and it just was so much easier than I expected it to be. So I used one of my students as a test subject, and we ran through things together and tried to figure out what these commands were. I had tabs and tabs open, just trying to figure things out. And then I introduced it whole class about 2.5 weeks ago, and it it literally took over me. Like I am not the expert in the room anymore, which is kind of awesome. It's the students that are doing the thing. And Simeon actually visited my class via Zoom last week. Was that last week?
I think it was last week. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. And
How
since
time
then,
flies.
um, they're also taking a JCTC, a college class right now, and they're putting that work off to work on this.
Wow.
I can walk around the room and see the ADX that open on all of their computers, and they're crowdsourcing information, and they're working together better than they ever did before. And some of that is almost malicious. They will cut each other, it feels like, to take the top in the leaderboard, but that competition has just lit my classroom up.
So you're seeing things out of your students that you had not seen previously, correct?
I had students who hated code, hated it, wouldn't do anything. So his projects all revolve around music production, and I've pushed him into that. Like that's great. I love the complex thinking that's involved with music production, and I've tried to give him some suggestions on how to shape it. And then this came into class, and he is currently sitting at the top of our leaderboard.
Oh wow.
Uh, he that's Nathan, and he is eating it up. Like he won't go to lunch sometimes. He says, "Oh, I'm just working on it at home. I'll come back in tomorrow and I'll be on the next part of the game." And that is it's so awesome. I have kids from all different ability levels too. Students that are AP level to students who would be in a regular comp class, and they are all very even with the way they approach this.
Wow. So Simeon, when you visited the classroom, what were you seeing from these kids?
Yeah, I mean they were so excited, and they were so like excited and focused when I showed up. And like usually you can tell, students have different attitudes if you come speak to a class. Sometimes they'll like, be like nodding off, like they're not be interested, and they'll be like, oh, like, they're forcing this guy to talk to us. But I mean, those guys were interested, right? They were like super excited about the game. And you could just tell, right? You could just tell the culture in the classroom. You could like see some of them like working on it. You could see they were like trying to like ask questions to get like an edge. You can see they had like a lot of feedback about like what was like good, what we could do better. There was just so much enthusiasm, which was like really, I mean, I think that's what when we do this work keeps us going, right? Like it is that feeling that you're trying to provide to someone else. And I remember like I literally pulled up like YAML config for how we make the game, and I was talking about like miter attack, and these are like very technical, like super deep things that like 99% of the world doesn't care about, and most people would kind of like knock that off, like I'm not interested in that. But they were literally like taking pictures with their phones of like the YAML config because they just
Wow.
wanted to get that like leg up. And I think that's kind of the whole point, right? Like when you're trying to teach these things is, and for me, really, that's how I learn, right? Like I hate learning things in the ether, and I'll learn things, and I'm okay in the classroom. I did all right in college, right? So I can learn stuff, but I'll usually forget it. But if you can like put like context and like reason behind and motivation behind someone learning something, like they are so much more willing to get that thing. Like I am more willing to go learn something if I know that it will serve a purpose for me. And I think those students are getting there. Um,
Absolutely.
Another thing you said like, and Sherry, you've been with us. We do so many sessions where it's almost hard to predict. And I said this, I was in a conference that it's almost hard to predict who will come out on top and who will be a shining star with KC7, right? Because sometimes I think as educators, as like employers, like you try to use you try to like diagnose or try to tell like, oh well, who this person might come out on top of, that person might be the best. And this always happens, and it'll be the quiet person who you would never in a million thought would be good at this that ends up being good. And I think I always appreciate that because it's like giving opportunity to shine to someone who otherwise may not have been noticed.
Absolutely. And Brian, so you sounds like you were not a cybersecurity expert when you started this journey.
It's an
So
understatement.
what have you learned through KC7?
So I heard of SQL. So I knew query language, I knew databases. Um, Probably 2 weeks before I introduced KC7 or met Greg, probably. I was teaching databases and query language, but we were using Microsoft Excel
Mhm.
in order to see tables and link them. And again, so theoretical because none of it was really working out. And then I get into KC7 and I see what it actually looks like when you query things and you have to sort through that information. And the way I taught it was so awful now that I've seen this. Um, so I don't think I would ever teach anything query language, tables, databases without KC7 as a backdrop for it. Um, but additionally, not cybersecurity-esque, but gamification with content that is seemingly so far above somebody's head is the way. And I don't know if it's just because it's our cultural zeitgeist and the way that we have video games in every realm of our lives, but they crave trophies. They crave completionism. So to see students crowdsource that the answers. So maybe that's something about cybersecurity too, is how much it pays to rely on a team. Um, because typically kids are in a class for a grade. They want their grade to be up. They want to be the valedictorian or the top in the class. But in this way, they want their peers to be with them at the top. And because if they're not going to have anybody to rely on for more answers.
That's
And
right.
that's
That
beautiful.
is exactly right. And we had this conversation last week when we were talking about the cyber camp. Do you feel that gamification, specifically your experience with KC7, that they learn essential job skills?
Oh yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I've been doing gamification for years, in various ways, but the resilience probably is the most important skill here. The ability to fail over and over again and continue reworking your process until you get that answer.
Mm,
And that's what I want to see in a kid. That's as a coach, as a teacher, as a father, like I want to see somebody be okay with failing. Because if they end up at the top of the leaderboard, then that means that they were willing to fail so many times and still push through. And I don't think I would hire somebody that has ever been willing to give up. Well, I mean, I'm not into hiring, but like my students, the ones you all were just saying a minute ago, it's you don't know who's going to be on top, and the people that are on top right now are not necessarily the ones I would have expected to be there.
yeah,
Um, so that's a powerful motivator. The student who is at the top of my board right now was not interested in a lot of these things. So to include the gamification and give him that dopamine hit for learning, uh, that's that's a really revolutionary thing that should be in many more classrooms all around our country.
absolutely. Absolutely. And it's teaching them it's okay to fail because you learn from failing and don't give it up. And how does that relate to the cybersecurity workplace, Simeon?
I was gonna say, did he watch last week's episode? Because we were literally talking about failure
Yeah.
last week and like how it's not just about the students, it's about us. Your question was how does it relate to the workforce?
Yes, in the cyber workforce.
I mean, that is the name of the game, right? You're gonna fail, right? And usually when we're hiring, when people are hiring, they're not hiring for like what you know specifically, they're hiring for potential, right? They're hiring for like, I'm gonna put you in an environment with like, maybe the same tools that you've seen before, or like maybe new tools. You may be put in an environment with a job that like you may know 1% of, which is what happened to my current job. I got hired knowing 0.5% of what I need for the job. And the expectation was like this person is going to be able to fill the gap, rise and fail and fail and fail and learn a lot. Right. And I think, from an employer perspective, what they're trying to see is like, do you have potential? And like the ability to, Brian, you were saying, your kids are in the class and they don't know anything about this new query language, but they're like crowdsourcing and they're making it work. Like that is a skill that employers are searching for. And sometimes it's hard to figure that out if somebody has that, right? But if you can talk about your KC7 experience, like I was trying to make this query work and it was not doing, and these are like XYZ steps that I took to make that happen. That is a huge advantage.
It's also really crazy how quickly they learn to pay attention to the little things. So when a word lights up red and they realize, okay, this is a useful search term here, and then that unlocks the next 15 little levels for them. But also when you were in my class, I remember one of my students was adamant that they needed hints farther along through the game.
Yeah.
And you stopped him and said, well, I don't have hints. I'm literally doing this at my job, and it comes to me looking at this database and trying to figure out what I can do with this information in order to find the missing piece. And that's where you said, oh, let me give you a hint or show you behind the scenes, and they all pulled out their phones.
Yeah.
But when you told them that it's about that investigation and that knowledge by just discovery, they put their phones away because they
Yeah.
realized there wasn't going to be a shortcut. It was a
Wow.
mindset.
Yeah.
And that mindset that's the shortcut in reality.
And as teachers, how many times do we want our students to understand that? It's the mindset. That's the name of the game. So it's just so exciting that they can experience that through this game.
As an English teacher, I would work with students for weeks to write a paragraph and turn that
Mhm.
paragraph into another, and then convince them that they need to add a sentence to link this one to the next one. And it was just grumbles and mumbles the whole time. And
Yep.
I would get good papers. I would get good answers and discussions. But this is such a different animal to see a student struggle with a query or a line of code for days and then finally get it and not be frustrated that it took them that long, but be excited that they found the shortcut, or I'd say shortcut, but it's clearly not very
Yes, sir.
short.
Yeah.
The long cut to the answer and still be so excited.
Absolutely. Something that I was thinking about as I was hearing you guys talk. So, Bryan, I'm a CTE teacher also, and I know we teach for those industry certifications. That's kind of the ultimate goal. So, Simeon, in your world, in the real world, is it more important to have certifications, or is it more important to have the the mental process of doing cyber, for
Yeah.
example?
That is $1 million question that everyone is asking. And when
Mm-hmm.
I was coming up, and different, I guess it kind of depends, right? And I would say there's a rank to it, right? Like, because at the end of the day, you're trying to prove to an employer, someone who doesn't know you, that hey, I can do this work. Um, Certifications show that you have some level of knowledge and that you
Mm-hmm.
can pass a test. You have the baseline knowledge. But if you're good at taking tests, you can pass any certifications and still not know how to do diddly squat. But you
Yes.
can pass. I passed a Security Plus certification when I was a sophomore in college. Like I literally sat down over winter break and I cracked open a book and I read through it and I did 1 million questions and I passed Security Plus. And then I went into a security operations role and I was like, yeah, I passed Security Plus. Like, what's up? Like, I know everything. And then I sat down and I heard the conversations and I saw it put work and I was like, I know nothing. I know
Mm-hmm.
the vocabulary and I know nothing. Like, this is a whole different universe. But if you like understand the thought process and you know how to do it, right? If you know where everything fits in the picture, right? Then it doesn't matter what tools they throw at you. We always say like we use KQL, but the whole point of KC7 is not about the KQL. It's not about that specific code. Because you're gonna get to an employer, it's gonna be something completely different. It could be Splunk, they're gonna throw completely different at you. But if you understand how the big picture works and you know how to go and find answers for yourself, then you're gonna be like, okay, well, new environment, same game. I know what the rough pieces are. I'm gonna go figure out how to research how to use this new query language. I'm going to figure out how to use these new tools. And I need to figure out how to use these new data sets. And that is going to pay you way more dividends down the road. So the way I've structured my career specifically, I've not leaned on certifications too much. Although they can be useful, I've leaned on like, hey, like how can I better understanding what happens so that whatever the environment is that I'm put in, I can make do with what I have.
So
Yes.
does KC7 prepare students for these industry certifications? Either one of you could answer that question.
In a way, yes, because and I started talking with Bryan is that it sets you up with a lot of like hooks to talk a lot about a lot of like technical things that you may not have access to, right? So you're going to see a lot of things and we don't really explain what you're seeing. And there's just kind of a lot happening at once. And you can kind of go through like about 20 times before seeing it, right? Like we're talking about like public versus private IP addresses. Like that is in there and you're going to see it, but we don't define it and we don't make you research it. You kind of have to go and notice the difference and go look at it on your own. So there's a lot of opportunities for like supplementing, right? And these are all the little things that will be in the certification, but no one will tell you like, how is it actually used contextually? You're going to see it in context in live action, but then it gives you some framing for like how, when you go research it, you have some framing for it. Because if you're a high schooler or if you've never worked in industry, and when I took the Security Plus, I was like, I've never worked in a corporate environment. I have no idea what this thing is because I've never seen one. I've never touched one. I don't know what a server is. I've never seen one, right? Like, how am I supposed to know how this thing works? I'll pass the test though, right? But if you like theoretically interacted with one in data, I think you're more likely to like grasp that when it comes to.
Yes.
Right.
So I have been so adamant against standardized testing my entire time that I've been a teacher. And maybe I shouldn't say that because, you know, it's my job. But I see no value in a test for English that's a multiple choice test, reading a text that they're never going to read again, to get to show that they understand how to analyze a text. We could do that with something they care about. We could do it in a way that's applicable to our real world. And I've done that. And then my students still have to take a test at the end of the year that tells them that maybe their knowledge set isn't good enough. But the creativity isn't tested. The ability to be resilient is not tested. Perseverance is not tested. So when I came into CTE and found that I was going to be teaching to an information technology fundamentals course, I saw it a little bit differently because I do see the relevance here, but it's like Simeon said, like that they're not. I taught about databases in Microsoft Excel, and that's not the same thing as what we're doing in KC7. Um, and I think this field is so unique in the sense that it's constantly changing. Uh, I have a flipper zero that has skills that people aren't prepared for yet. I have seen students deal with or at least discuss breaking into a Vision Pro because it now has map data of a room. Those are all things that didn't exist a year ago. Um, so there's no way to give one test that's going to prepare them for these things. But when you have something like this, that puts them in a real world situation with stories that are based off of real world events and give them the real world knowledge they need to piece things together, that is, I don't know how to test it, but that's what we need to do.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Do you plan to prepare them for technical interviews? Because I know that's a huge part of the cyber world, right? Sammy, and either one of you want to talk about that a little bit? That's a different type of interview from what I understand.
Is this a performance-based interview?
You want to explain it, Sammy, a
Yeah.
little bit what it's
So
about?
I think usually when you have like technical interviews, it's about like being able to situationally discuss like you get a situation and you have to talk through it, right? And so, usually on your resume, right, you might say, hey, I have XYZ certification. And the interview will be like, well, I'll see about that, right? And usually it goes something like this. You're in this situation, you have these options available to you. What are you going to do? right? Now, if you've been studying in a textbook the whole time, you're gonna say, like, I don't know, like, is it A, B, C, or D? Well, it's none of the above, right? That's not how that question is. They're not really testing for, they're not asking a question to see if you get the right answer. They're asking the question specifically to see like how you maneuver through the question. I think
Yeah.
similar to KC7, it's like, okay, well, you have this question, like, like what are the steps I'm gonna take? First, I'm gonna try this, then I'm gonna try that, then I'm gonna try this third thing, then I'm gonna try this fourth thing. And this is the order in which I'm gonna try it out in. And I think KC7 kind of like helps you get more comfortable in that, because like in any given question, we never really tell you what to do, right? We just kind of give it to you, and we're like figure it out, punk. Like, come on. And in the interview, it's the same way of like you've spent all this time and you've tried and failed over and over and over again. And by failing so many times, you kind of like start building up an arsenal of like, the things you do to fail, right? Your bag of your failure tactics. And
I
that's
mean, if
what the
you
interviewer
start
is looking
checking
for,
things
right?
off the list,
Yeah,
things
exactly.
not to do,
Things
then
not to do. But the things not to do are like will help you find what to do, right? Because you can say, okay, well, I'm in an interview. Here are all the things I would try that would fail before I could, get closer to the answer. And like that in itself is a valuable skill when you're doing technical interviews.
I see that as way more useful than a regular interview where it tests your ability to just sell yourself, which I do see as a valuable skill as
Yeah.
well. But earlier this year, again, with my low knowledge of this entire field, I took 7 computers and broke them and put them around my room. And their job was to land at a station and figure out what was wrong and fix it and then
Wow.
do a write up on it. And that involved a lot of those same skills.
Yeah,
That is what
Absolutely.
they're going to be doing in the real world. So, yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So what I haven't actually participated in a technical interview, but from what I understand, it's not about so much about the content, the concepts. They want to see your thinking process. They
Yeah.
want to see you analyze a problem and resolve it somehow. Is that
Yeah.
right, Simeon?
Yeah. Because a lot of times you get to a job in these roles, and there's no answer on Google, right? Like,
Mhm.
especially, you get to be in a spot where you're the foremost expert on X, right? There is no answer that anybody has. Like, it's literally just you talking about a very, very niche thing. And so like, what are you going to do in that scenario, right? You have to figure out how you think differently, how you work with other people. Like, how do you work with other people to get to an answer, right? That is a skill set in itself. How do you innovate? How do you problem solve? Um, which is, I think, even just a generally good life skill. I think like once you
Yeah.
start thinking that way, you can solve a lot of problems that way.
Which KC7 does prepare students for that because that's what they do.
Because you can spend a lot of time toiling, and that's kind of the beauty of it. And Brian, your students were kind of asking me like, hey, like I've been toiling with this for a long time. Can you give me hints? I'm like, no, the beauty is in the struggle. Like that is the whole entire point. And at like I think at the beginning stages we have like these hints to like help you get comfortable with it and to prove to you that like, hey, this is something you can do. But over time they start to get harder and harder. And I was just showing Brian like the hardest module of the question. So I'm literally taunting you.
And those aren't hints, those are taunts for sure.
They're taunts. But the feedback I have gotten from people who go through all of I've had people go through every single KC7 module, and by far they say that the most fun they had is with the hardest module. Like that is the most fun and the best feeling they've had out of it, because you struggle for so long. You spend literally a week on one question, right? Imagine spending a week on one question and you go to sleep and it's all you think about. You're like, how, like he's calling me soft. Like, how am I going to like figure out the next thing? And then you have an idea and then you try it and maybe you get somewhere and maybe you don't, but you're kind of like spinning around the subject. And so that once you finally get that answer, it is the best feeling in the world. But it's about like that struggle.
My so maybe I hated this at the beginning, and you probably heard this, Sibian. But you get to the question, and you click the hint because you're so stuck. It's about discovery commands for anyone who's going to go through Valdoria. And the hint is use your eyes. And I was infuriated. I was so angry. And when I was able to finally figure it out, like it was so obvious,
Yeah, use your
but
eyes.
I d sort of. I used lots of commands. I had I had query after query lined up, and I was running through all of them. And then finally, I figured it had to be kind of obvious. So I went back and figured it out. Um, but then days later, when I introduced this to my students, they all hit this exact same spot. You
Yeah.
hear them yelling, and I'm pretty sure in the feedback form that my students gave to you, it was use your eyes, like just the most passive aggressive way to tell you to like forget it. But when I said, hey guys, here's how you use your eyes, oh, all
Uh,
those light bulbs started ticking off.
yeah.
And for me, that's it. That's
Yeah.
the whole reason that I'm in this field. That's why I love teaching. And that is the most rewarding sensation to watch those light bulbs tick off. And this
Yeah.
game allows that to happen so um, deservingly. That's the word we should use. Once that light bulb hits, they deserve that light bulb.
But one thing you'll notice is that, it you get that feeling once, right? And the way with the way this you learn things with KC7, it's not really about the answer, it's about how you get to it, right? And so once you learn like how to use your eyes, it's something you only have to learn once. And so the next time you're in that scenario, right, I could change up the answer any which way how, like you already know what to do because your brain has essentially been rewired a very different way. So you're like, oh, I'm in this scenario. What do? I use my eyes and I can scroll and I can look at what happens. And like that is something that will like stay with you like for a long, long, long time. And that is an essential skill that like it's hard to like I can put that in a paragraph, I can put that in a book, and you can read it 1,000 times over, and it won't really make sense until you're in that scenario and you struggle through it, and then you use your eyes and you're like, oh, duh.
So technical interview then, because as my students are struggling and they're asking each other, the way I hear them describing their process, well, I couldn't figure it out this way, so I started looking at the timestamps and I looked for everything around those timestamps and all of these different tables, and it's ingenious. Like
Yeah.
the things they're able to do when they're frustrated at not being able to beat a level. And man, I don't know how many times I can say it, but the gamification of this content is the way it should be taught. It's so
Yeah.
easy to fall into a groove and learn while you're doing it and not realize that you're learning. But as they say, I looked at the timestamp, I found all of these things. I did this query with their host name and was able to pull up all of this activity, and I just looked for things that didn't make sense. That's it. That's
Yes.
the thing.
And,
That's it.
and Greg and I always say, right, whenever we run these events, and you may not be able to appreciate it fully, right? But the language they use when they're like struggling through and they're talking about it, if you were like sitting in like a security operations center and you were sitting through a real intrusion investigation, this is the sort of language you could use. And it's hard to fake that, right? Like the way they're talking about these things, like you can kind of tell when someone's faking it and when someone really doesn't understand what we're talking about. When they're talking about it, they're like, oh, I'm talking about like host names and process commands and looking at malware and like the process that they I mean, this is real stuff, right? And usually people are like, oh, like you need to go through like 5 bajillion hoops before you get to this level. It's like, no, they can do it on week one. Like, why not let them do it on week one? Because they're using the language properly, and they're understanding conceptually what's happening. And like, you just can't, it can't get better than that.
That is, yeah, that's what it's all about. It definitely is what it's all about. So, you teach the cybersecurity pathway, is that right, Brian?
Yes.
So, are you using this? What classes in the pathway? For those that just explain a little bit, there's usually it's a 4-course sequence. And what are you using KC7 in? One class or more than one?
So I'm using it with my juniors right now. With
Mhm.
my freshmen, I've been introducing them to the basics because, you
Okay.
join cybersecurity because it sounds cool on paper.
Sure.
But a lot of them had no more experience with technology than their phones. So we're taking computers apart and putting them together. We're doing code and robotics. Um, but my juniors, were pretty much on that level because of the foundational knowledge they had when I had walked into the room. Um,
Mhm.
so I wasn't sure what to do with them if we're going to be really brutally honest here, because they are already so far in their journey. And I know that in order to get from point A to point B, there's a lot of steps to get there. And they had missed an entire staircase. So I I tried my best, and then I put this game in, and it unlocked lots of things in their brains. It shows them what cyber's about. It shows them those soft skills that we need. It shows that having a partner or a friend at another industry that can give you some suggestions is pretty useful.
Yeah.
Um, so digital literacy is what we call the beginning stages, and my juniors are in cybersecurity. And it is my lack of experience that's not making it as cybersecurity as it could be. But in the last month that I have been speaking with Greg and now Simeon, I I'm ready for next year. Hit me up, guys. I'll teach you something. And if I can't, I know that my 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds can.
Yeah.
So, yeah, what are your plans for that senior class? Just curious.
Well, code is super important. I found out, just being able to make sense of patterns. That's how I was teaching code before. And now with this, I'm actually falling kind of back into English with it, because it's the story. As soon as I put this in my class, I gave them an episode of Monk that we watched the solution to the show.
Yeah.
And I I spun it as, how does data tell a story? And this is how data tells a story. You find it out by looking at numbers and looking for patterns and things that stand out. So my seniors will take another college class the second half of the year, but we will work to strengthen our code. We are going to work to figure out databases. We're going to have technical interviews now that I've learned that term, and we're just going to go. These juniors actually have a project that I'm introducing to them tomorrow, for KC7. Well, using KC7 as my launch pad, I suppose. But I'm giving them the option. Do you want to help reconsider the UI of this website? Do you want to create your own story using the MITRE ATT&CK framework? Do you want to help make it more useful for a classroom? Those things that students can do, um, are really surprising when they are given a little bit of the freedom with enough of the content. So this code and running with it, I guess, would be my right answer.
Yeah, yeah. And don't you think I have mentioned this to Simeon and Greg more than once. I think it's brilliant how they have taken something so technical and they've weaved a story throughout. How many modules do you have now, Simeon?
Man, we're at like 15 or something
I
like that.
mean, it's a story. It's like you said, Brian, it's a story. It's a murder mystery or some sort of a mystery that you're using data to solve, whatever it is that the module's presenting. And I think it's brilliant that they brought that piece into this.
Every project-based PD that I've ever gone to is about the whole picture.
Yes,
Not just this individual skill or that individual skill. And it's really hard to do a project-based anything without a story.
yes.
And this gives it real world stakes, and
Hmm.
it has them invested in characters that they don't know, even if their name is Barry Schmelly. Um, and it is, I mean, core content has been pushed for a reason, right? We need English skills, we need math skills, science skills, social studies skills. But now this the refocus on CTE and allowing them to walk out of a building with skills that they could go right into the workforce.
Yes.
This this really pushes it in a way that hasn't been pushed before, I think.
And who knows, maybe your students could somehow collaborate with Greg and Simeon to write a module.
We are working on it right now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Let's do
so
it.
I think that's awesome. I think it is amazing.
I actually warned both Greg and Simeon that I hope they don't get sick of me, because I have never met two people that excited me more to be in a classroom and to not know what's next. Because the ability to take something like this, and I think it was one single question I asked and said, can I add another game to my classroom? And Greg said, that's not a feature yet. And now Simeon just showed me that I have a classroom set up ready to go, so I can add as many things to it as I want. I can use it for quizzes. The I feel like we're at the 100-yard line of a 40-mile race right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I don't want to get to the finish line, but I'm excited to be able to get it in my sights.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I would say the coolest part about KC7, I always say this, is it was never supposed to be anything big. It was just a project in my repo of many cybersecurity pieces of code that I wrote. And the reason it's kept going is because every time we run it, we realize that A, people respond well to it, and B, we learning something along the way. And so the way I had imagined it initially is very, very different than what KC7 is today. And the reason is because we're able to like work with folks like Bryan, who are like willing to invest the time and the energy and give us feedback so that we can transform it into what it deserves to be. So I'm so excited to work with Bryan, because Bryan's like, I always say, I like to work with people who are about that action. So I'm not saying that we're going to do something 6, 12, 24 months in the future, but let's do it tomorrow. Let's try something, right? We talk about students about like, let's try and fail. And then, we get scared behind failing. So we do the 6, 9, 12-month plans. Now let's do it next week. Let's try something. Let's get the feedback. Let's improve it. And I think that's what's going to get us there, because Greg and I always say we created this because it's what we would have wanted when we're learning cybersecurity. And I'm so excited to see how the students react, and I'm so excited to see how we can shape something that influences the way cybersecurity is taught, not just in Kentucky, not just in our corner of the woods, but taught by everyone, right?
Absolutely. And Simeon, I love those 5 principles that you guys came up with. I keep bringing those up. Bryan, I don't know if you've heard the 5 principles that they use in cyber camp, and I put him on the spot. Let's see if he knows it off the top of his head.
Oh, I don't, but I can pull up a PowerPoint presentation in about 4 seconds.
Because it's so, and it's principles that they live by as they're designing and tweaking and adding. And
Yeah.
I
Bryan,
wish I had known this when I was a teacher. It definitely would have been.
You've never heard this, but we did this cyber camp, and we knew it was going to be hard for the students. So we came up with this list of 5 principles that we had them say every single day.
Excited about
and
that.
the 5 principles, and I realized they kind of turned into the KC7 principles. Is 1, I will try my best every day. 2, when I fail, I will learn from it and try again. 3, I will challenge myself to learn new things. 4, I will learn new things. I will learn things from my peers and help them learn from me. And 5, I will use what I learned to make the world a better place. And we like had these kids say it every day in hopes of inspiring them to like push themselves outside the comfort zone. And you'll have to watch last week's episode, but we ended up needing those principles more than they did as a result of that. So
Can I share with you something that I make my students say every day? Because I think you're going to see some pretty cool parallels here.
yeah.
So I have a slide every day that says how to be awesome at the top.
Yeah.
And I have 6. It's be kind to others, learn from your mistakes, embrace curiosity, show integrity in all you do, believe in yourself, be crazy, think different.
I love that.
Awesome.
I might steal yours.
They like, you can have normal classroom rules and you can tell them like don't be on your phones or come to class on time, but those things are expected. But these things take 0 talent. None of those things require talent at all. It requires a mindset.
Yes.
And so by creating that mindset to where kids get thirsty for knowledge, like no wonder kids get excited about this program, because when you frame it from that lens, there's nothing to stop them or hold them back except for themselves.
Yeah.
And what's so exciting about this, we've got these two folks that have managed to create this game that's just on fire. We've got energetic and passionate educators like Bryan, and they come together and the sky's the limit. And it's so exciting to hear this. You guys have I'm wanting to get back in the classroom. I'm really excited about all
Well,
this.
Sherry, come to my school. You can hang out.
Oh my goodness. I may have to, because actually I'm in a job transition period right now. So I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So we'll see where it takes me. But this is just amazing. And Bryan, what would you say to any educator that's even doesn't necessarily have to be a classroom teacher? Let's say maybe somebody that works for Kentucky Department of Ed, other departments of ed, national. What would you say to these folks if they're watching this and want to know more about KC7?
First off, take risks. I think we like to be too safe, because what's traditionally worked, we assume will continue to always work, and I don't believe that's the case. And challenge yourself, because I don't have this background. So to hop in here and be successful at something like this shows that it is possible to do with the right approach. And if more content embraced these approaches in general, then I think we would have education that surprised everybody. Because kids do get burnt out. They have a screen in front of them that tells them exactly what they want to hear all the time. And that might be because they're not hearing those things elsewhere. But when you walk into a room and kids don't want to be on their phones unless it's to Google a way to find the right answer,
Right.
that's not Google the answer. It's the way to find the answer.
Yeah.
That's different.
Yeah.
And that's exciting.
And
And
don't you think educators get burnt out too?
oh, I wouldn't have, had I not been involved with the Board of Education 2 years ago, I don't believe I'd still be
Mhm.
in the classroom. And then had I not switched to this role that I'm in this year, I don't know that I would have continued even past that. But now I want to be there until I can see my kids working alongside Simeon and Greg, and changing the world. That's what I've been about since I started being a teacher. Um, I'm yeah, I'm excited. I want to be here, and the energy in my classroom shows that, I think.
That's
Yeah.
incredible,
And,
incredible.
and
And
Bryan,
I would challenge any educator watching this, join us on this adventure. It's quite the journey. Simeon,
Students
did
will
you
be
have
too.
something you wanted to say? I'm sorry.
yeah, no, Bryan, you said it was like an adventure for you, like diving into the cybersecurity world, or at least into our like kind of our end of the security world. It's also a journey for us, right? Because we're not educators, like we've never done this, right? And so we're also like diving into this. It's kind of like the clash of two worlds, because we're also like diving into the education world, and we have no idea what we're doing. And so we're leaning on you, and we're leaning on Sherry, and we're leaning on others to like give us good feedback and teach us some lessons. And we're leaning on the students to teach us lessons about like we can do this better or we can do that better. And I think that's really how we've progressed, of like, being open and vulnerable enough to like put something out there that isn't perfect, and then letting people show you more of what they want. And that's what we've done, and that's what we're continuing to do.
I think if more people had that perspective, that it's okay to not know something as long as you're willing to find that answer,
Yeah,
because finding you guys has led me to a lot of new answers, and I really hope that my involvement with you can help you find some of those answers too, because
sure.
the things that I feel like we could make happen with this, the things that I can see already happening in my classroom or at my school are insane.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
super
Yeah.
excited.
This has just been so inspirational, and I just can't wait to see what your students come up with, Bryan. I'm so excited to see that. Either one of you have closing remarks? Anything you'd like to say?
I will just say
I'm
I'm excited.
Oh, I was okay. So let me change mine. I'm so grateful. I am so grateful for the serendipity that got Greg and I to be introduced, for Greg to have missed a meeting, and Simeon to be there, has been great as well, because their excitement is exciting to me. It's contagious, and I'm so happy that that happened.
Yeah.
I'm very excited because I've been working with these guys, like Simeon said, since we kind of started having the conversation. But I'm excited to have another educator that I can bounce ideas off of. So yeah, this is great. I'm sorry, Simeon, go ahead.
No, I'm excited. I'm excited to work with Bryan because he's willing to experiment and try things. And
Mhm.
I always had this grand idea of like, if we can just get to this point, like something like we could do this, right? And it's kind of just been an idea in my head, but I think we're at a place right now where we can experiment, and once you can essentially make something that is good enough, what you will find along the journey, right? And we've kind of been collecting people on the journey along with us, right? We started with just a handful of people, and we've been collecting people on this huge journey. And I think, as we keep going and as we keep perfecting the process and as we keep learning and being willing to challenge ourselves of like, hey, can we do this better, differently? I think more people will start to catch on, and more people will start to use this. And hopefully we can have, an impact on the lives of more people.
That's right. That is right. Well, guys, it has been a wonderful chat. I've enjoyed it thoroughly. And Bryan, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a pleasure. Simeon, as always, thank you so much. And again, if you would like to know more about KC7, just visit the website. And what is the website again, Simeon?
It is KC7cyber.com. If you have a computer, you have an internet connection, you can play today.
All right. So with that, I'll say good evening, and everyone have a great week, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Bye.